Well, good afternoon. It is about 1 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. I want to thank you for participating in today's PacTrans presentation. My name is Kevin Chang. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Idaho. I want to welcome you again. Before I introduce today's speaker, let me just spend a minute or two setting the stage and actually paying some bills for today's presentation. I'm pleased to announce that PacTrans is in the process of rolling out its Workforce Development Institute, and one of the upcoming course offerings will focus on school zone safety. It's a 4-hour workshop that provides a comprehensive overview of topics ranging from MUTCD application to developing a safe routes to school program. And our first offering, which I will lead, is scheduled for January 18th and 19th, 2022, from 12:30 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. Pacific time on each of those days. So we cordially invite all practitioners, researchers, and any interested parties to consider enrolling. To make this a little bit easier for you, I will provide some information in the chat box here in just a minute, and also share a reminder at the end of the webinar. This leads us to today's presentation on how the city of Seattle has addressed school safety. And I might add, with some really unique innovations, particularly as the pandemic has evolved. So I'm very pleased to introduce Ashley Rhead. She is a senior transportation planner at the Seattle Department of Transportation. Ashley manages the Safe Routes to School program and focuses on making it easier and safer for kids to walk and bike to school. She has a master's degree in urban and regional planning from Portland State University, and has been with the Seattle DOT for the last 8 years. So with that, Ashley, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kevin. So again, I'm Ashley Rhead, and I'm with the Seattle Department of Transportation. And today I'm going to talk to you about safe routes to school in Seattle and talk about some key engineering safety tools. This will let me go to the next slide. There we go. So at the Seattle Department of Transportation, our vision is that Seattle is a thriving, equitable community powered by dependable transportation. And we are committed to 6 core values, including equity, safety, mobility, sustainability, livability, and excellence. So today I'll give you a brief overview of Safe Routes to School, and I'll mostly focus on talking about our key engineering tools, including along the roadway improvements, crossing the roadway improvements, neighborhood greenways to schools, traffic calming, and school streets. So Safe Routes to School is a national movement to make it easier and safer for kids to walk and bike to school. In 2015, we launched a 5-year action plan called Safe Streets, Healthy Schools and Communities that laid out strategies in the 6 E's, including education, encouragement, engineering, enforcement, evaluation, and empowerment. And today I will focus on the engineering E. So some typical improvements in our engineering toolbox include along the roadway improvements like sidewalks and walkways, crossing treatments, neighborhood greenways to schools, traffic calming, and school streets is a new program that we started last spring as schools reopened during the pandemic. So sidewalks are the typical kind of concrete sidewalk that you'll see in most of the city of Seattle. It includes curb and gutter improvements, so drainage improvements, and it also has a planter strip with street trees. Sidewalks cost in Seattle nowadays about $400,000 to $500,000 per block. So we also look at alternatives to traditional concrete sidewalks. And we've developed a number of different alternatives that we primarily install on lower volume non-arterial streets. So these could be painted walkways, they could be an asphalt at grade walkway. We typically use wheel stops to provide a buffer between the walkway and the travel lane. And sometimes we will, on blocks that have an existing at-grade sidewalk, we'll put in a planter strip with street trees and wheel stops to prevent people from parking right up close to the walkway and providing that barrier. Crossing the roadway improvements can include things like curb bulbs, and they can be concrete curb bulbs or painted curb bulbs. These are two examples of some painted curb bulbs that we've installed in the city. They are a lower cost option and they don't impact drainage on the street. So they're much quicker to install as well as less expensive. Floating, excuse me, floating bulbs and median islands are another tool that we use. So floating bulbs are also less costly than a traditional curb bulb because we can leave the drainage as is on the street. And they provide the benefit of narrowing the roadway, slowing the speeds as they get towards the crosswalk and improving visibility for the pedestrian. Median islands have the benefit of allowing the pedestrian to cross one direction of travel at a time. And they're also less costly than a regular curb bulb. Rectangular rapid flashing beacons are pedestrian activated lights that flash with a very bright irregular pattern that's very eye-catching to drivers. We use these generally on higher volume streets with higher speeds. And then lastly, pedestrian half signals are a tool that we use in Seattle, and it's a traffic signal that controls the major direction of traffic and uses a stop sign for the cross streets. So we have a policy or a guideline that we use to determine what the most appropriate treatment is for any particular location. And it's based off of the number of lanes on the street, the volumes of vehicles, and the speeds of vehicles. So for a lower volume, lower speed road, we'll typically do just a regular marked crosswalk with signs, school crosswalk signs, if it's a school crossing. And for streets where volumes are getting higher and speeds are getting higher, we look at doing geometric enhancements, so curb bulbs or median islands or floating bulbs, or a rectangular rapid flashing beacon. And then on our highest volume, highest speed roads, we look at doing both a rectangular rapid flashing beacon with geometric enhancements or a pedestrian signal. And generally, if we're looking at multi-lane roads, we would do a pedestrian signal. So neighborhood greenways to schools are another tool that we use to create routes to schools that connect high density locations of where students live. So these routes prioritize people walking and biking. We stop control the intersecting streets, and the people walking and biking can pass through without having to stop. We do traffic calming along the route. So generally that means speed bumps or speed cushions. We install wayfinding signs to help people find their way along the route. And we also make safer crossings of busy streets using those crossing treatment guidelines that I just discussed. Traffic calming is another tool that we use. So typically for arterial streets, we first will install the 20-mile-an-hour school zone. So that means putting in the school speed limit 20 signs on either side of the school property or school crosswalk. And then we have an annual speed data collection process that we go through, where each spring we collect data on speeds and volumes in arterial school zones all across the city. So we use that to prioritize arterial traffic calming. So we'll do things like install 20-mile-per-hour flashing beacons. And these are the yellow lights that flash along with the school speed limit 20 sign. And those flash in the morning at school arrival times and in the afternoon at school dismissal times. And we have a policy that we use to create those school, the flashing beacon schedules for each school throughout the city. And at this point, we have around 80 or 85 different sets of flashing beacons for schools. And when we have evaluated the flashing beacon program, we found that that when the beacons are flashing, the 85th percentile speed, so the speed that most people are driving, on average drops by about 15%, down to around 26 miles per hour. And that generally is on streets with one lane in each direction. So we found that on streets that are wider, have no curb to sort of provide that that visual narrowing of the street, or that have multiple lanes, we don't see speed reductions quite as good as that in those types of conditions. Generally on 2-lane streets where you can only drive as fast as the person who is driving in front of you, we see more traffic calming benefit from the flashing beacons. And then in Seattle, we also have a speed camera program that is run by the Seattle Police Department. And there are speed cameras that are associated with several flashing beacon locations throughout the city. I think we have maybe 14 locations at this point. So it's auto enforcement. So essentially, if you are speeding in those school zones, then you get a ticket in the mail. So it doesn't require police officer resources to be on the ground giving the ticket. So we found that also to be quite effective, and most people who receive a ticket don't get a second ticket. So we know that that is an effective tool. We also install speed cushions. So we found speed cushions are also similar to the 20-mile-an-hour flashing beacons. They're also effective at reducing speeds by about 15% on average. For the locations that we've looked at, the speeds drop down to about 28 miles per hour. So this is an image of what the speed cushions look like. And they're really similar to speed bumps, except they have these brakes along the extent of the speed cushion. And those brakes are placed in such a way so that emergency vehicles like fire trucks can pass through unimpeded when they're responding to an emergency, whereas a typical vehicle would have to drive over the bump. And so they would either completely go over the bump, or maybe one side of the car would be over the bump and the other would be in the kind of space in between. So as I mentioned, that we found them to be another very effective tool. They've reduced speeds by about 15% on average, down to about 28 miles per hour on average. And some locations are more effective and some are less, but on average, they're very effective. We do have some limitations on where we can install them. So we typically don't install them on multi-lane roads. We've just done 2 or 3 lane cross sections. And we also coordinate closely with the Seattle Fire Department to make sure that that we aren't impacting any of their major fire response routes. We also will install speed cushions on residential streets that are a fire response route, also on residential streets that have higher slopes or steeper slopes, so that the rainwater can pass through and not get kind of stuck on one side of the speed cushion. And then in addition to our arterial traffic calming, we also do traffic calming on residential streets next to schools. So we have a policy that we can install speed bumps on within the non-arterial school zone around any school in the city without having to do a speed study before. So essentially, our policy is that within the non-residential school zone, directly adjacent to the school, there's going to be large numbers of students walking and biking and passing through the area. And not just, in morning arrival and dismissal, but schools are really a community resource that are used all throughout the day and on the weekends as well. So we routinely install speed humps in the non-arterial school zones around schools. And then another tool that I'll talk about is our School Streets program. So this is a new program that was started last spring when schools were reopening for the pandemic or during the pandemic. And excuse me, we really wanted to be able to answer the question of what are you doing to support schools reopening in this challenging time? And the school district, the Seattle Public Schools, also was looking to answer that question. At the time, they were not offering general education bus service. So only students in special education were receiving district transportation. So a lot of the families that were used to relying on district transportation to get to school no longer had that resource. And so the city of Seattle, kind of very early in the pandemic, started a program called Stay Healthy Streets. And those are along neighborhood greenways, which are one of the tools that I mentioned earlier. So neighborhood greenways, again, are those streets that prioritize people walking and biking, and they have stop control along the intersecting streets and speed bumps along the route. And then also those arterial crossing improvements to help people get across the busy roads and continue on the route. And neighborhood greenways are installed all across the city, and they have been, the routes have been determined through a lot of public outreach. And so they're really great resources that we have in Seattle. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, the city and the mayor decided that because of the need for social distancing, that it made a lot of sense to close down our neighborhood greenway routes to through traffic. So essentially, because in general, social distancing means staying about 6 feet away from other people, our sidewalks are only 6 feet wide, which means that you can't really have two-way direction travel on the sidewalk and maintain that 6 feet of separation. And so the Stay Healthy Streets program was born kind of out of necessity. And so neighborhood greenways all across the city were closed down to through traffic. And so that made it really easy for us to develop the School Streets program. So it's essentially the same as the Stay Healthy Streets program, but instead of being, a mile or 2 or 3 long route, they're just 1 or 2 blocks that are directly adjacent to the school. So these are blocks that are right next to the school. You can see the school building, you can see the school playground, there's school zone signage, and they are closed to traffic, but they are opened up to families walking and biking. And we launched the program on an opt-in only basis. So that means that the school needs to reach out to us to request to participate in the program. So we decided that kind of in contrast to the Stay Healthy Streets program, where the city chose to close down the neighborhood greenway routes, we decided that it made the most sense to allow schools to opt in to the school streets program, because each school has their own traffic circulation plan, and knows how their school circulation functions best, and can identify whether this would be a benefit to them. It also helps with communication to the neighbors, if the neighbors understand that this is something that that the school has specifically requested, and is a necessity for them to manage kids getting to school and leaving from school during the pandemic. When we very first started school streets last spring, they were open 24 hours a day. So that meant that 24 hours a day, the school street was in effect. And after the spring, when we kind of reconvened, we decided that it made more sense to have them be in effect during school hours on school days. So 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. captures before school starts until after school ends, and after the kind of after school activity at the school it has ended for the day, and then just on school days, so not on weekends as well. So school streets help to provide social distancing space. So most school, or all schools in Seattle, have a daily attestation process where families will line up socially distanced, and they have to basically attest that they don't have any COVID symptoms, that they haven't been around anyone who's tested positive, that they haven't traveled out of state, et cetera. So there's kind of a whole process in place now that didn't used to be the case for families arriving at school and kids being sort of accepted into the building. Apart from the kind of pandemic context of school streets, they also really help to reduce traffic congestion directly adjacent to the school. And they help to kind of better organize drop off and pick up activity. So, most parents who are dropping off by car really want to get as close to the front door as possible, be able to see their kid, getting out of the car and walking into the front door of the building. But unfortunately, there's just not enough space for everyone to do that, or to have that experience. So taking those blocks out of the equation makes the traffic circulation much more organized and flow a lot better. It also helps improve air quality in that space directly next to the school building and next to the playground by removing the larger volumes of vehicles from those blocks. It improves safety because now you don't have vehicles crossing over the main crosswalks where people are getting to the block that the school is on. And it helps encourage walking and biking by showing that the school really prioritizes student safety, and basically it helps parents think about other ways of getting their kids to school. So on school streets, who is allowed is local access for residents. So the folks who live on the block are still able to access their house. Delivery drivers can still access their destinations. Waste pickup still operates, and emergency vehicles are still able to get to their destination. As well as district provided transportation. So that might mean a school bus, that might mean a taxi or Lyft or Uber. And then that also includes students with mobility needs who are in a family vehicle. We have a lot of I shouldn't say a lot. Families or students who are in foster care, or families who are homeless, they receive district transportation. And so they may not be in a school bus, they may be in a taxi or a Lyft or an Uber. And we felt that it was very important for those students to be able to get directly to the door of the building that they need to access, so that the Lyft driver, the taxi driver can connect the child directly with a school staff member and not need to park, a block or two away and have the child walk in alone the rest of the way. So who is not allowed is through traffic and your typical parent. So that really significantly decreases the amount of traffic that is on the block, and it really improves safety for everyone who is involved. So where are school streets? They are on non-arterial streets. We don't close down any type of arterial street. We don't close down any non-arterial street that might have a public bus route. We do have a few non-arterial streets with bus routes within the city. And we also work to not create any new dead end streets. So we try to make sure that that the school streets are sort of naturally self-enforcing, because there is no enforcement of school streets. We don't have police officers out there giving people tickets. We don't have, photo enforcement of school streets. They really need to make sense to people who come across them, that they would, see a street closed sign, they would see the school there, they would see school activity, and not need to do a U-turn or a 3-point turn to turn around to get back out of a dead end that we might have created. They're currently at about 8 public schools all across the city. And this includes schools that typically would not have participated in a program like this. So to give a little bit more background about street closures next to schools, we've had within the city of Seattle, we've had a permit program available for many decades that any school could apply for a permit to close the street next to their school. However, it's a permit that has a cost. So during that time, we've had several private schools that have the permit and pay an annual fee. But it's something that we had heard that public schools were interested in, but that paying the cost of the permit fee was not a possibility for public schools. So it's no secret that there's generally not enough money for public schools. So to have to pay for something that is a public benefit didn't really make too much sense. So the pandemic and the start of the Stay Healthy Streets program really kind of gave us an opportunity to rethink how the city was approaching these school street closures and provide a different direction and a new way for schools to participate. The other benefit of the School Streets program, and I'll just go back I'll go back to this slide, is that there's very little effort required on the part of the school. So the school does need to opt into the program. So they need to, take that first step to initiate participation in the program. And we have a School Streets webpage with a form online for them to fill out. But they don't need to put the barricades out. They don't need to put them out and bring them back in every day. We actually contract with a third party to put the barricades out. Our sign shop makes the signs and gives them to the third party vendor, and then they put the barricades in place. And they have this photo is from last spring, so it doesn't show the hours, but they have the hours on them. So the barricades are in place 24/7, but the school street is in effect from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. So there's really a low barrier to participation in the program because it doesn't require any effort on the part of the school other than to buy into it. So they need to do the communication to their school families and let them know that this is something that their school does, and that there's an expectation that parents will follow the street closure signs and not drive within that space. But we make a flyer for them to give to their parents, either through their electronic communications, or we also print them and have them delivered to the school building so they can hand them out directly to families. And so it's really with the permit that we had available in the past, the school would have had to put the barricades in place every day and take them back out. And so there was more effort on the part of the school. So this is a very easy way for any school to participate in the program. And as I mentioned, we currently have it at 8 public schools out of about 100 public schools. And all of those 8 schools are ones that participated from last spring. So there actually was one additional school that did not continue this school year. And the reason why they didn't continue, which I think is sort of an indicator of where the program may not be as successful, is this particular school was an option school. So that means that families can opt in to go to the school. So they might not live nearby. Within the city of Seattle, our public school system works where people are, or children are automatically assigned to their neighborhood school. And then so most people live within walking distance of their neighborhood school. And then outside of that, there are option schools that people can choose to go to. And so this school was an option school. So a lot of families didn't live within comfortable walking or biking distance. And then in addition to that, the school is in a part of town where parking was pretty tight. So most of really all of the other schools, it's fairly easy to find parking within, a block or 2 or 3 of the school building. So parking a few blocks away and walking in is really a feasible option if you are still choosing to drive to the school. So that one school didn't participate, but the other 8 schools found that the school street was really a benefit to their traffic circulation, that it really supported students who are walking to school and wanted to continue. And one of the schools that is participating in our school streets program had been kind of doing their own school street prior to the launch of the program, and we had worked with them to get a permit and to be sort of in compliance with our permitting program. And it really, just being able to pay for that permit was such a barrier to them participating. So now we have the school streets program, which is free to the schools, and so they can be in compliance. And I would say probably 6 out of the 8 schools are ones that would not have the resources to pay for a permit. So that really is a measure of success of our school streets program. And I think that is my last slide. Yeah. So I can take questions if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, so for any of our attendees, please feel free to either unmute, or if you'd like to send a question through the chat pod, you're welcome to do so. You'll find, for those that are not familiar with Zoom, you'll find the chat icon at the bottom of your screen. And if you click on that icon, a chat window should appear, and that's where you can enter your question. Ashley, I'm going to just really quickly jump in and ask a question with regard to the pandemic. Have you noticed any sort of trend changes associated with children walking and biking? Has it increased, decreased? I know, if I read correctly, Seattle schools also dealt with a bus driver shortage, and so there was some transitioning of students moving away from the yellow school bus and sort of throwing it on parents to figure out how to get their son or daughter. So all that said, have you noticed any modal shift occur at your schools?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, I don't have any information to answer that question. So we work with the school district to do a mode choice survey, ideally every year. And we've really had challenges with getting that data regularly. The mechanism for that is called a hands up survey. So it's something that the National Safe Routes to School Partnership provides. And it's really simple. It's just the teacher will ask the students, how did you get to school today? If you walked, raise your hand. If you biked, raise your hand, et cetera. And they just tally that up and then ask the same question for how are you going to get home today? And so we, over the years, we've worked with Seattle Public Schools to conduct that mode choice survey, and it was felt that it was just too heavy of a lift. Last spring is when we typically do it, and so unfortunately, I don't have that data. I can't tell you that. And I really wish that we did, because I think it would be really, really interesting to know, how are people getting to school if they don't have the option of a school bus? Are those trips shifting to family car? Are they carpooling? Are they walking and biking? What does that look like in a pandemic? I wish I knew.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I have a question that popped up in the chat. It said, you mentioned that each school creates their own traffic circulation plan. This person is interested to hear a little bit more about that, if that's something that's in your purview, and then who specifically makes that plan and how is it prepared?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that really is in the purview of the schools to do. The Seattle Department of Transportation Safe Routes to School program has created a guide to help schools do that. It's an arrival and departure traffic circulation toolkit that provides step-by-step instructions for schools to do that. So sometimes it's a principal, sometimes it's a school safety committee, sometimes it's a PTA. It just depends on the particular school and what kind of capacity they have. And they'll develop the plan, and the Safe Routes to School program at the city supports the implementation of that traffic circulation plan primarily through our mini grant program. So our mini grant program is something that I didn't mention earlier. It's in one of the other E's of Safe Routes to School, and it's a grant program that we run that offers up to $1,000 for schools and community groups for anything that supports safe walking and biking to school. And we do include the traffic circulation management in that. So if a school needs sandwich board signs or traffic cones or safety vests or walkie-talkies, then they can apply for a mini grant and get up to $1,000 for those materials. And it's a really simple application process. And we also provide the funds, the dollars upfront to the school so that it's not on a reimbursement basis, because we know that PTAs and schools have very tight budgets. So we provide the dollars upfront.
All right. Wonderful. Well, Ashley, I have not seen any other questions. I'll give the audience one more chance.
I could talk a little bit about some of our other programs that we have while y'all are thinking about questions for me.
Please.
So we also fund a walking and biking safety education program that's delivered through Seattle Public Schools. And this is a program that's delivered through PE classes for every 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade student at Seattle Public Schools. So regardless of which school they go to or which PE teacher they have or which principal they have, they receive a 3-week in-class on-bike safety curriculum. And the school district works with Cascade Bicycle Club, which is a local advocacy organization here in the Seattle area and that serves Washington State. And they train the PE teachers on how to deliver the curriculum. And then they also provide the bicycle fleet to use in that program. And we've had that program in place for 7 years. And we just signed a new memorandum of agreement with the school district to extend it another 5 years, and also to expand it to middle school so that children will receive 6 consecutive years of walking and biking safety education. And we're in the process of developing that curriculum. And so I've been doing a deep dive into our child bicycle and pedestrian serious injury data. Luckily, we have had only 1 child fatality the past 5 years, well, 7 years really, which was, it was a child who was in a parked car. So it was one of those strange things that happen sometimes. But anyway, so I've been looking at our child bicyclist and pedestrian serious injury data, and finding that, well, first of all, there aren't very many. There's been 15 since 2016, and when it happens, it's about half driver behavior and about half child behavior. And so one of the great things that we have in Seattle is this walking and biking safety education program. So we can look at the data and see, what was happening in those collisions, what was the action that the child did in the case where it was the child's fault, and how can we address that behavior through our education program, and how can we really, bring home that information 6 consecutive years, so that by the time they are in middle school and venturing out by themselves without adult supervision, and then once they're getting into high school, that they can be making smart decisions. And often it revolves around running across the street to catch the bus, really, which is also something that adults do. It's not just something that kids do. So really, emphasizing that there's going to be another bus. It's very important to wait for the signal, and you can always catch the next one. I see a question here that says, when you close a street or plan to, how much lead time or advance notice do you give parents, and what traffic analysis do you do before implementing it? Great question. So because we implemented the School Streets program during the pandemic, we in Seattle, I don't know how it played out in other places, but in Seattle, we sort of had an interesting situation where we kept hearing that schools were going to reopen, and then they didn't, and then we would hear that they were going to reopen, and then it didn't. And so when we actually got final word and like a realistic actual date when schools were opening. We only had about 2 weeks to get everything in place. And so we actually gave neighbors very little notice. It was not even, it was like less than a week notice that we were going to be closing these streets. So then for this school year that started this fall, we gave much more advanced notice, but at that point it was something that they were already familiar with. And we haven't done yet. We haven't done a formal evaluation of the program. But one measure of success that I mentioned earlier is the schools that are participating are schools that would not have the funds or capacity to implement the old way that we used to have available for families. The other sort of measure of success is the lack of complaints. So when we implemented the program last spring, we had a lot of people calling and writing in thanking us for closing the streets. Sometimes these were families, sometimes these were just neighbors who lived nearby, and we're really grateful to see that the city was doing something to support families going back to school. We had very few complaints. So there was, I think, 1 or 2 complaints from neighbors who lived on a school street. And when we shared with them that they, as residents, they were still able to access their homes, that addressed their concerns. We did also hear other complaints, but those were mostly from that one school that chose not to continue in the future. So we found that in that case, it wasn't an appropriate program to have at that one location. But we don't actually do any traffic analysis before implementing. We don't do any data collection or like formal traffic analysis. We look at what the street type is. We look at what the street grid is around the school. So is there is there a connected street grid where there's a lot of alternate routes for drivers? Are there a lot of places for families to park a few blocks away and walk in? Is this, a major cut through route through a neighborhood where that wouldn't preclude us from closing the street, but it might make us need to do more significant education about the street closure. So it's generally, because we're not closing arterial streets, it doesn't require significant analysis, essentially.
All right, Ashley, I have one more question that popped up. What I'm going to do here is let me switch over, and I'll get queued up here to my screen. Actually, I'll just continue talking as I set up my screen here. But the question is, just wondering if you're aware of other municipalities around the country doing innovative things. Are there other practices perhaps that you're aware of other jurisdictions doing things that maybe Seattle is not? Or perhaps a better question might be, are there other ideas that you and your colleagues are considering as you move forward with Safe Routes to School?
Yeah, those are great questions. So we're one of the only school streets programs in the city. New York City does also have a school streets program, and they take theirs even further to completely close 100% to vehicles, and they actually hold class on the street. So that's really taking school street, it's essentially sort of a different purpose of a school street and increasing outdoor classroom space. I would say that in general, Seattle is pretty much at the cutting edge of of Safe Routes to School within the US. There have been school streets programs internationally in other countries, in Scotland and in England, that have been in place for years, for a long time. But we haven't had kind of the the political support for it until the pandemic. And in terms of what new things the Safe Routes to School program in Seattle might be doing, that is a very timely question because we are about to launch our new Safe Routes to School action plan. I don't know if you caught, but our last one was in 2015. Our last 5-year action plan was in 2015, which was more than 5 years ago. But we were getting ready to launch our updated action plan when the pandemic hit, and that sort of put everything into uncertain territory where we didn't know what our budget would be. We didn't know really what we would have the capacity to commit to in a new action plan. So we kind of delayed it until we got to the other side of that level of uncertainty, and we're getting ready to launch, actually, I think this week, our updated action plan that has, it lists out in now the 7 E's. So equity and environment are kind of our framework for thinking about the rest of the E's. And it lists out everything that we will continue to do, and then also all of the new actions that we will take. And one of the things I think that is particularly exciting is implementing Stay Healthy Streets to schools. So really that is sort of combining neighborhood greenways, Stay Healthy Streets, and school streets. So having, closing 1 or 2 blocks next to a street is a step in the right direction and helps with managing traffic circulation and traffic flow directly next to a school building, but creating an actual route that serves those higher density pockets of where students live to their school on an extremely low volume route really provides a much more comfortable way for families to walk to school and really to bike to school. It makes it much more comfortable for families with small children to just take over the street and have all the space they need and have the comfort of knowing that they're not mixing in with traffic. And on our Stay Healthy Streets, residents can still access their homes and deliveries, waste management, emergency vehicles. But in general, the volumes of traffic on those streets is very, very, very low. So they're much more comfortable routes. I personally, last year when my daughter was in preschool, her preschool was just off of a Stay Healthy Street. So she and I would go, and I would walk and she would be on her scooter. So it was comfortable for me to be scooting with my 4-year-old on. So I think that is really kind of an exciting new direction that we're going to be going in.
All right. Well, wonderful. On that note, I want to, Ashley, thank you virtually for taking the time, and certainly wish you all the best as you continue to do great work for the boys and girls that attend Seattle schools. Really appreciate your time. Again, just a final reminder, this presentation, is a lead into the PacTrans Workforce Development Institute. I've posted some information on the screen. We'll be talking more about school zone safety. If this is a topic that you or your colleagues might be interested in, please consider enrolling in the training. Again, offered January 18th and 19th in the afternoon on those 2 days. And that somewhat lengthy link is available both on the screen and also in the chat pod. With that, I want to thank you again for participating. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and happy holidays. Thank you, everyone.